Good evening and welcome to the September 8, 2025 work session of the Mayor and Council and Planning Commission tonight. We have one topic for discussion and it's a big one and it's kind of nerdy. So for anybody who likes to dig into the numbers and really get into demographics and all that good stuff, you're going to have a great time tonight. We're going to get an update on the Visioning Data Analysis Report, which we started in, I think, 2019, and now we're sort of updating it as we get ready for our master plan process. And with us to lead us in this discussion, Kirk Eby, Laura Mayfood, Emily Fishman. Welcome all and take it away.
All right. Well, thank you, Mayor. Good evening, Mayor and City Council and Planning Commission. This is a joint work session presentation on the 2025 update to the Visioning Data Report, as the Mayor mentioned. Presenting tonight, again, are myself, Kirk Eby, as well as Laura Mayfood and Emily Fishman. The Visioning Data Report compiles information about Gaithersburg and the surrounding area from various authoritative sources and analyzes that information for the current year of interest and over time. Maps and charts are also created for the report to help visualize the observed data characteristics and trends. The major topics in the report are demographics, housing, economics, and transportation. To help make tonight's presentation more streamlined and effective, staff has included some charts that are not found in the report, such as the two shown on this slide. And again, those are just in the presentation, but not in the report. In addition, there are certain charts from the report that have been modified to focus solely on the city rather than including the surrounding areas. The first Visioning Data Report was completed in 2019 and used data from 2015 and 2016 for the current year of interest, and it used data from 2010 as a comparison year for changes. The 2019 report also included the major topics of demographics, housing, economics, and transportation. There were several key takeaways identified by the 2019 report. The first key takeaway was that the city exhibits very different characteristics east and west of Interstate 270, with the eastern side tending to be less wealthy, less educated, more likely to rent, more likely to use transit, and more diverse. In contrast, areas of the city west of I-270 tend to be a higher income, more educated, more likely to own their home, and more likely to drive a car, and less diverse. The second key takeaway was that the city looks kind of like a bedroom community where most residents work outside of the city, and most people who work inside the city come from areas outside of the city. There are very few people who both live and work in the city. And the third takeaway was that the city's population growth seemed to be driven by renters who came to the city to rent because of their age, income, citizenship status, or the type of job. These renters also tended to have larger households, indicating a need for larger rental units with more bedrooms. The fourth key takeaway from the 2019 report was that only certain job sectors would experience growth, namely the professional science, technology, and healthcare sectors. Retail is expected to grow slowly, even though it accounted for a large number of the city's existing jobs at that time. The last takeaway from the 2019 report was that the city has limited land left available for new development, so most growth would likely be infill redevelopment, where new housing and jobs would compete for the same space. Paper here, sorry. The 2025 report uses the year 2022 as the current year of interest and the 2016 as a comparison year. So it's sort of a continuation of the previous report. The 2025 report found that several key takeaways from the 2019 report remain true, including the city's diversity and the contrast between areas east and west of I-270. Other takeaways that remained unchanged for 2025 include more renters and rental housing east of I-270, most residents being highly educated, just generally, and most residents working outside of the city, with very few people who both live and work within the city. So staff will now discuss the updated 2025 Visioning Data Report. Like the 2019 report, the new 2025 report analyzes demographic, housing, economic, and transportation data from various sources. As previously mentioned, the 2025 report uses the year 2022 for the current year of interest and 2016 for the comparison year, which allows post-pandemic trends to be observed. Like the 2019 report, the 2025 report is intended to help guide policy decisions, including the ongoing master plan update effort, as well as routine site plan development reviews and things like that. Staff notes that because the 2025 report is using that 2022 data, it does not reflect impacts from recent changes, such as those related to federal policies and the federal workforce reductions that are happening as we speak. The 2025 report is organized into three broad sections. The local and regional needs section looks at current conditions citywide and compares the city to the surrounding areas. Usually those surrounding areas are just the county and the metropolitan area, but occasionally we have Rockville in there, just so you know. The current data section looks below the city level, providing maps and tables at the census tract level. And lastly, the analysis section discusses major findings and key takeaways of the 2022 data, as well as notable changes from the 2019 report. Again, to help make tonight's presentation more streamlined and effective, staff has combined those first two sections for each major topic of demographics, housing, economics, and transportation. And also, as previously mentioned, the presentation will primarily focus on the city rather than the city plus the surrounding areas. So the 2025 report uses the same data sources as the 2019 report, as shown here on this slide, but staff has added some information from the economic census. Staff notes that while different data sources may show different or similar patterns, each source is still a valid representation of the real world, just that they're based on different methodological approaches. Sometimes those methodologies do result in an apparent anomaly on a map or in a table or a chart, and where those anomalies have been identified in the report, staff did provide additional information. Also, within the same data source, such as the American Community Survey, or ACS for short, there can be an apparent difference or change observed between years, but when you look at the margin of error, it becomes clear that there's actually not a statistical difference, and so there's really not an actual change between those years. Again, where those sort of no actual changes were identified in the report, staff did provide additional information. Another new item that is included in the 2025 report is the Equity Emphasis Areas, or the EEAs. These were developed by the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments, or MWCOG, in 2021, and those were used to identify those census tracts that have high concentrations of low-income households or traditionally disadvantaged racial and ethnic populations, or a combination of both of those. The EEAs can be used to help identify areas where additional planning and policy efforts should be focused. And in the 2019 report, the 2016 ACS was compared to the 2010 ACS, and both of those data sets used the same census tract boundaries, which made those comparisons between the 2 years just straightforward. For the 2019 report was also able to compare medians, since, again, that data was available for the same census tract for both of those years. After the 2020 decennial census was completed, the Census Bureau did make changes to several census tracts in the cities, and the map on the right shows those changes in blue, that where the census tracts changed from the 2010 census to the 2020 census. And those changes mean that it's not actually possible to directly compare information from the 2022 ACS to the 2016 ACS for those census tracts that have the changes. For the other census tracts, there is a way you can just directly compare. So in order to provide maps and tables that show that change from 2016 to 2022, staff did develop a methodology to allow that comparison between those years, and additional information about that comparison methodology can be found in Appendix B of the report. And now that you have all that background information, we can go ahead and dive into that first topic, which is demographics. So since 1980, Gaithersburg's population growth has been slowing, and this is primarily due to greenfield land being developed, along with fewer annexations of greenfield land around the city occurring. So after 2000, most of the greenfield land was either built out or under construction, and most growth since then has been in the form of redevelopment or infill. The dashed line in the chart represents that change in the growth pattern of the city from the more greenfield development-driven growth to the infill and redevelopment-driven growth. Also, since the year 2000, the city's share of the county's population has remained stable at around 6%, which indicates the city's population growth is similar to the county's and has been similar to the county's. Gaithersburg's households grew faster than its population between 2016 and 2022, with population growing, growing 8% versus the population growing 4%, which implies that there are fewer people in each household for that time period. And that is in contrast to the 2019 report, which showed higher population growth and smaller household growth, which that indicated that there were larger household sizes driving the growth. Although single householders living alone only account for 27% of all of the city households, they show the greatest increase by household type, which again indicates that smaller households are driving the recent growth from 2016 to 2022. Families make up about 2/3 of Gaithersburg's households, but they only grew about 5% from 2016 to 2022. And the percentage of both families and single householders living alone remained about the same in 2022 as it was in 2016. So that's the percentage overall in the city. Again, at about 2/3 of all households being families, and around 27% of all households being single householders living alone. And now we have our first nice map here. So the map on the left is showing the current percentage of single householders living alone, with those darker colors, green, indicating that there are higher concentrations of those households, and the lighter colors, the lighter greens, indicating fewer of those households. And as you can see, the highest concentrations of single householders living alone are east of Interstate 270, while the map on the right is showing the change in single householders living alone from 2016 to 2022, again using that modified methodology that we talked about earlier, and further detailed in Appendix B. So on the map on the right, the orange colors represent increases, while the blue colors represent a decline. And the darker colors are used for larger increases or declines, and the lighter colors are used for smaller increases or declines. And so that map on the right does show there were major declines of single householders on both sides of I-270, as well as increases on both sides. So there's really not a pattern east and west shown in that map. And throughout the rest of the presentation, most of the slides and maps will be arranged just like this one. So the current conditions will be on the left, and the changes from 2016 to 2022 will be shown on the right. The maps will also use the same colors throughout the presentation, so that was to kind of immediately let you know which map you're looking at. So the map with the green colors will be the current conditions. The map with the oranges and blues will be the change conditions from 2016 to 2022. And again, the darker the color, the more the change, the lighter the color, the less the change on the change map. So the average household in the city for 2022 was 2.67 persons, which is similar to the 2.75 average that was reported in 2016, and even the 2.53 average that was reported back in 2010. So staff notes that the margin of error for those three data points are within each other. And so statistically, there's actually no difference between those average household size for 3 years. So basically, the city's average household size remained the same, statistically at least. Owner-occupied units do tend to have a higher average household size than renter-occupied units in all 3 years, and there is a statistical difference there, so that is real. The main point is that average household size, even for renter-occupied units, is well above 2.0, which means there's more than 2 people in each household, right? So that indicates that there's probably a demand for larger dwelling units that have more than just like 1 bedroom or a studio or something like that. So the map on the left shows households with the largest average size are primarily concentrated east of Interstate 270. And the map on the right shows that areas west of I-270 seem to see the largest increases in average household sizes since 2016, interestingly. The increases on the west side correlate well with the declines in the single householders living alone that was shown on the previous map. Large declines in average household size from 2016 to 2022, again, are visible on both sides, and so that doesn't seem to be a pattern as much as the increases. Gaithersburg has been a very diverse city since the 2000 census, and that's when Gaithersburg became a minority-majority city. Since the year 2000, the city has become more diverse, with the white non-Hispanic population declining from just under half of the city's population to about 1/3 of the city's population. People of color grew from just over half of the city's population to about 2/3 of the city's population. From 2016 to 2022, the other race and multiple races populations experienced the greatest growth, followed by the Asian population. Both the white, non-Hispanic, and black African American populations declined from 2016 to 2022. As shown on the map on the left, the areas east of I-270 have the greatest concentrations of people of color, which generally align with the equity emphasis areas. And in contrast, the southwest portion of the city, right there next to Route 28 and Route 124, those have the lowest number of people of color. And of course, the inverse is true. So the highest proportion of the white non-Hispanic population would be in the southwest part of the city, and the lowest, and then east of I-270, you'd have a lower proportion of the white non-Hispanic population. And that pattern is very similar to what was seen in the 2019 report. And for the 2022, most census tracts did see an increase in the people of color population, though there were large declines in 2 tracts east of I-270, which also happened to be equity emphasis areas, and you can see that on the map there. About 40% of Gaithersburg's population is foreign-born, with about half of them being naturalized, which is the same as it was in 2016 and even back in 2010. From 2016 to 2022, the foreign-born population grew much faster than the native-born population, which is the opposite of what was seen in the 2019 report. The 2019 report showed that the native-born population was growing much faster than the foreign-born population between 2010 and 2016. So again, back to 2016 to 2022, the city has seen an equal growth in naturalized and non-citizens, while the county and metro area saw a decline in the non-citizen population and a much larger increase in the naturalized foreign-born population. So again, the city does look a little different from the county in several areas of foreign-born. The map on the left shows that the foreign-born population is present throughout the city, and only the Asbury area and southwest portion of the city have less than 20% of foreign-born persons. The map on the right shows that between 2016 and 2022, the city saw both growth and decline in the foreign-born population throughout the city. Again, no pattern there. But as previously mentioned, the overall proportion of the foreign-born population remained about 40% of the total city population. So the city's population continues to age, with median age rising by nearly 3 years from 34.8 in 2016 to 37.4 in 2022. As shown in the population pyramid on the left, the largest age group in the city is age 35 to 54, which of course reflects that median age I just mentioned. And followed after that, the next largest group is the age 22 to 34 group. The chart on the right shows that all but 3 age groups experienced growth from 2016 to 2022, with the age 65 and over having the largest increase. Both of the age groups that are under 10 years old showed a decline, indicating fewer young children in the city. And the young workers age group of 22 to 34 also saw a decline. And so the map on the left shows the highest concentration of persons age 65 and older is in the census tract that houses Asbury. Kind of no surprise there, I don't think. With the rest of the city generally having a much lower proportion of the senior population. The map on the right shows that the city experienced both growth and decline in the age 65 and older population throughout the city, so no pattern there. But more census tracts did show growth than showed decline overall. The map on the left for this group, it does show a population under 18, which is dispersed throughout the city, except the North Frederick Avenue corridor and the Washingtonian Crown areas, where it is in a much lower proportion. The map on the right shows that more than half of the census tracts in the city saw a decline in that under 18 population between 2016 and 2022, though surprisingly, one of the tracts that saw strong growth also includes Asbury. So that concludes the demographic section, and I'm now going to hand it over to Laura to talk about housing. I'm going to pass her the keyboard so she can do it.
Thank you, Kirk. Housing growth in the city in recent years has primarily been multifamily, shown by the green line here on this graph, which is consistent with the city being mostly built out. And as Kirk mentioned earlier, the city's growth prior to 2010 was dominated by annexations and greenfield development, which provided more opportunities for single-family housing. And again, just to reiterate, that dashed line on the graph is meant to show that transition from annexations and greenfield development to more denser infill development. And then the solid green block on the graph shows the percentage of housing stock in the city that is multifamily, which is currently at about 50%. The map on the left shows percentage of detached housing units, and the map on the right shows percentage of multifamily units. And you can see by the darker green areas that the census tracts on the east side of the city have higher concentrations of multifamily units. This graph shows the percent change in owner-occupied units, which is the blue bar, compared to renter-occupied units, which is the orange, since 2016. Housing unit growth continues to be dominated by renter-occupied units. However, owner-occupied units did experience greater growth from 2016 to 2022 when compared to the 2019 report. This graph also shows that Gaithersburg is more similar to Rockville. They're both pretty much built out and have greater growth in renter-occupied housing. In contrast, there is more land available for ownership housing development in the metro area and in Montgomery County. The tract level map shows that tracts on the east side of the city have higher concentrations of rental housing, which correlates with more multifamily units as seen on the previous slide. The majority of multifamily rental units in the city are 1 or 2 bedrooms. This graph uses CoStar data and shows the breakdown of units by size within each building class. The highest rated buildings, which are 4 stars, have higher proportions of studios, which is the purple bar, and 1 bedrooms, which is the orange bar. And these are typically newer buildings, so many newer buildings in the city have smaller units. We also calculated citywide vacancy rates by unit size and saw that the larger units had lower vacancy rates, which could indicate unmet demand for larger units. And a similar pattern was seen in the housing element when we looked at the same data. These graphs show median gross rent and home value since 2010 after adjusting for inflation. The city's median gross rent, which is the blue line, increased by 6% from 2010 to 2016 from 2010 to 2022, with the greatest increase from 2010 to 2016. Our rents are higher than the metro areas, but lower than both Rockville and Montgomery County. And just to note, changes in rent could have been impacted by rent freezes that went into effect during the pandemic. And then the city's home values are lower than the county, Rockville, and the metro area, and show a sort of inverse relationship to rents. So they declined from 2010 to 2016 and then rebounded slightly to 2022, but they have still not recovered to 2010 levels. And this is most likely due to the housing market crash and subsequent recession. This graph shows cost burden, which is how much of one's income is spent on housing costs. On this graph, cost burden is divided into 2 discrete categories. There's cost burden households spending between 30 and 50% of their income on housing, and then severely cost burden, which are spending more than 50% of their income on housing. Cost burden rates are higher for renters than they are for owners, with about half of all renter households being cost burdened or severely cost burdened. And this data supports the housing affordability gap that was identified in the city's housing element. That indicated a mismatch between household incomes of city residents and the cost of housing that's available to them. It showed a housing supply gap for households with incomes of $80,000 to $120,000 and for those earning less than $40,000. And this can contribute to higher rates of cost burden, as oftentimes these households are then forced to occupy housing that is more expensive. For owners, census tracts on the east side of the city have higher rates of cost burden than tracts on the west. And most tracts saw a decrease for owners in housing cost burden, shown by the blue on the map on the right. And then staff also noticed equity emphasis areas tend to have higher rates of cost burden. And then for renter cost burden, as I mentioned before, cost burden rates are higher for renters than they are for owners. And census tracts on the east side tend to have higher rates of cost burden for renters as well. And then rates of cost burden among renters have decreased in the southwest corner of the city, and then it's actually increased in parts of the east side of the city where the rates were already higher to begin with. Now we'll move on to the economic section of the report. After adjusting for inflation, the city's median household income, which is the blue line again, is below Rockville, Montgomery County, and the metro area. And this graph shows household income since 2010, and you can see that after adjusting for inflation, it has remained fairly stagnant for all geographies. However, household incomes in Rockville, Montgomery County, and the metro area have all recovered to 2010 levels, whereas in the city they have not. For household income, median household income is the preferred measure, but to be able to compare across tracts with boundary changes, as Kirk mentioned in the beginning, average household income had to be used instead of median. So the map on the left shows median household income in 2022, and then the map on the right shows changes in average household income. But staff would expect the change in average household income to be similar to the change in the median household income. As seen on the map, tracts on both the east and west sides saw increases in income levels. However, the tracts with the highest incomes in the southwest corner of the city saw an increase, whereas some of the tracts on the east side of the city with the lowest incomes saw a decrease, indicating that disparities in incomes are becoming more pronounced. These maps show families below the poverty level Many tracts with higher rates of poverty are also in equity emphasis areas and on the east side of the city, correlating with the lower incomes as seen on the previous slide. But there have been both increases and decreases in poverty on both sides of I-270, so no clear spatial pattern there. So I'll talk a little bit now about the city's commercial building stock. This table shows square footage of commercial space by sector using CoStar data. And I'll just qualify this, and we put this in the report as well. There are some limitations to CoStar data. Some of the detailed numbers may not be completely accurate, but they were used in the previous report, so we used them again. And they can be a good source to provide a broader view of general trends. So according to CoStar, the city's over 15 million square feet of occupied commercial space supports just over 38,000 jobs. And then 1.5 million square feet of available vacant space could support another 4,500 jobs. And this is based on the city's own conversion factors. For employment data, the 2019 report used data available from ESRI. For this report, we included ESRI data as well as the economic census to be able to compare and identify any common trends. So you'll see in the report there are some differences between the data sources, but both sources show that the largest employment sectors in the city were professional, scientific, and management, and administrative and waste management services, education and healthcare and social assistance, and retail trade. Both data sources also showed retail shrinking and professional, scientific, and management and administrative and waste management services increasing as a share of city jobs, and that was predicted in the 2019 report. For unemployment, tracts with the highest unemployment rates are located east of 270, but there's not a very clear divide between east and west. There were increases and decreases in unemployment rates on both sides of the city, so no clear spatial pattern. But one pattern to note is that two of the tracts with higher incomes in the southwest corner of the city actually had an increase in unemployment, while a couple of the tracts with lower incomes on the east side had a decrease in unemployment. The report includes commercial inventory data from CoStar, multifamily residential rental apartments, which is the dark red on these pie charts, make up the largest share of the city's commercial income-producing space in terms of square footage. Retail and office uses, which are the purple and light blue, each make up about 20% of the city's total commercial square footage. However, there's over twice as many retail buildings as office buildings in the city. And similar to what was seen in the 2019 report, office is the oldest category of commercial space, with the average building age just under 60 years old. And then the youngest categories are hospitality and flex space. Office also has the highest vacancy rate at over 11%. The city has seen both a decrease in office square footage and an increase in office vacancy since 2018, indicating a decrease in demand. And this is reflective of national trends towards increased telework since the COVID-19 pandemic. Retail space has decreased in square footage since the 2019 report, and vacancy rates have remained low. Industrial and flex space have increased, and vacancy rates have decreased, indicating an increase in demand. The report included 3 maps showing commercial properties that have a high redevelopment potential based on size, age, and assessed value. The first map in the report highlights properties based on their size and age. The second map highlights properties with existing buildings that would be worth more without the building. And then this is a third map included in the report, which combines all of the factors from the first 2. So this third map includes properties that have buildings built before 1990 that are located on a parcel that's larger than 3 acres and where the market rate land value is greater than the total assessed value. So the maps in the report that met some of these criteria showed properties were concentrated along 355 and 117. But as you can see on this map, not many properties meet all 3 criteria, and one of them is AstraZeneca, which does include older buildings but has more recent renovations and is also seeking approvals for additional improvements. So as noted in the 2019 report, the parcels ideal for redevelopment are limited. Denser development may be needed to accommodate projected growth, and residential and commercial uses could end up competing for the same space. And now I will give it back over to Kirk for projections.
Okay. Just move this over. I was going to Emily in a second. All right. Well, thank you, Laura. So I'm going to talk about the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments, or MWCOG, growth projections. So as a reminder, the Round 10 forecast was adopted and approved in 2023, so it does not take into account the recent changes to federal policy and federal workforce reductions, and both of those, could have an impact on the cities, the counties, and the metro area's future growth. So the table on the right shows that Gaithersburg's population was projected to increase by 23% by the year 2050. Households were projected to increase by 32%, and jobs projected to increase by 37%. Overall, the city represents just over 1% of the metro area's households, populations, and jobs throughout the forecast period, indicating that the city's growth is expected to be similar to the growth of the metropolitan area. The chart on the left shows Gaithersburg's projected growth graphically, with household and population growing linearly, but jobs growing faster in the next several years, and then flattening out a little bit more in the later years. The Round 10 projections are lower than the Round 9 projections, which reflect the pandemic, the pandemic basically just reset the population, households, and jobs to lower baselines, a lower level for 2020. The next slide shows the active development pipeline, and that includes projects that are likely to be constructed within the next 10 to 15 years. These projects typically have an approved schematic development plan or final site plan, and most of the forecast jobs in the city can be accommodated by the active development pipeline. More than 80% of that non-residential active development pipeline and the associated jobs are office, research, and industrial uses, with the next biggest category being retail, restaurant, and general commercial, and that comprises most of that remaining pipeline. About half of the additional households shown in the forecast that are forecast to be there by 2050 can be accommodated by the residential active development pipeline, and that pipeline is primarily multifamily housing. So that means that, per the forecast, there's about 3,500 additional housing units that would be needed by 2050 to meet that forecast number. And those residential units, as mentioned earlier, would compete for the same space as a non-residential pipeline and the associated jobs. And again, that's all before the recent changes at the federal level. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Emily, who's going to talk about transportation.
All right, thank you, Kirk. So as mentioned, this next section is about transportation. All right, so for Gaithersburg's employment flows between 2015 and 2022, the total number of people employed in the city increased by 5.1% to nearly 45,000 jobs. Furthermore, in 2022, 90% of Gaithersburg's employed residents worked outside city limits, with a 2% increase from 2015. Concurrently, 93% of workers employed within Gaithersburg live outside of its boundaries, which has remained consistent. The percentage of Gaithersburg residents who live and work in the city has also remained steady at approximately 7% of the total jobs and 10% of the total employed residents. Overall, the city has a greater number of jobs or workers than residents who are employed, which is why that share of total jobs is lower than the share of total residents. These maps present the total amount of city residents who are employed and total amount of jobs in the city by census tract. Census tracts that have the highest total employed residents are located in the city's denser neighborhoods, and census tracts that have the highest total number of jobs are located in the majority of our employment nodes. One data anomaly identified by staff is shown in the map on the right, which indicates census tract 7007.27, which is also on the right side, which covers the Deer Park neighborhood. According to the 2022 data, this tract contains over 4,000 jobs, whereas prior to 2020, it had only about 300. Staff is aware that the 2022 job count for this tract is overstated. However, the rest of the data aligns with staff's knowledge of employment distribution across the city. It is likely that the excess number of jobs attributed to this tract are actually located elsewhere within city limits, as the overall number of jobs appears reasonable. Since the 2019 report, the COVID-19 pandemic has led to a significant cultural shift in commuting patterns. The upcoming federal mandate requiring employees to return to the office in 2025 may impact employment trends in the city of Gaithersburg. However, it is important to reiterate that this report does not reflect the current changes happening at the federal level. In terms of mode share, driving alone continues to be the primary means of transportation for Gaithersburg's workforce, although it declined by 11% between 2015 and 2022. Rates of bicycling and walking have remained steady at or below 2%, Meanwhile, public transportation usage, including both bus and metro, has decreased, dropping from 15% in 2015 to 8% in 2022. In contrast, the share of residents working from home increased significantly during this time, rising from 4% to 20%. These maps portray the large percent increases in Gaithersburg residents working from home and the large percent decreases in city residents using public transit for their commute. These numbers have most likely been influenced by the COVID-19 pandemic and its impact on the workplace. For Gaithersburg's class of workers, the majority of employed city residents work for a private for-profit firm at around 61%, with the next highest class being the federal government at approximately 12%. The commuting mode split for each class of worker shown on the right indicates that all but unpaid family workers drive alone to work as their preferred method of commuting. Using longitudinal employer household dynamics, or LEHD data, we can see where employed residents living in the city are commuting to for work and where workers in the city are commuting from. Both the distance and direction of a person's commute can significantly influence their mode of transportation. However, it's important to note that LEHD data captures the location of the employer and not necessarily where someone is physically working. So, for example, if someone is working from home, their work location is likely the employer's establishment. While LEHD data offers directional commuting insights at various geographical levels, staff has chosen to use county districts for our analysis because they are large enough to reveal meaningful commuting patterns. This map shows the county districts in and around the city, which is outlined here in green. The four main districts discussed in the next couple of slides include District 2, which contains Clarksburg and Germantown, District 4, which contains Rockville and North Bethesda, District 9, which contains Montgomery Village and the entire city of Gaithersburg, and District 13, which contains Aspen Hill, Wheaton, and Silver Spring. For employed city residents commuting to their job, the majority commute up to 24 miles, with almost half commuting less than 10 miles out of the city. The top three most frequent directions for residents to commute to outside of the city are towards the southeast, east, and south. Furthermore, the majority of employed residents commute to District 9, District 4, and Washington, D.C. Compared to 2015, residents commuting to work in District 9 stayed consistent, while those commuting to District 4 and D.C. declined, with only 10% of residents commuting to D.C. And the map further shows that the majority of employed city residents commute within District 9 and in the southeast direction. For workers commuting into the city, 44% of them commute less than 10 miles. The top three most frequent directions for workers to commute into the city are from the southeast, northwest, and east. And furthermore, the map shows that the majority of workers commute from District 9, District 13, and District 2. Okay, so finally, we're going to talk about the correlations and that we noted in the report between the different key takeaways, as well as any possible master plan implications that can emerge from the data presented. The first correlation is that city household incomes are not keeping pace with rising rents, leading to a growing housing cost burden, especially for renters. Additionally, the city has lower median household income and home values compared to surrounding areas, but higher rents. And half of renters are cost burdened, highlighting a disconnect between the incomes of those living in the city and available housing, further confirming the housing affordability gap. Furthermore, the city's average household size has stayed stable, averaging over 2.5 persons per household since 2010, with most recent and projected housing growth being in multifamily units, especially with studios and one-bedrooms included. As older buildings with larger units are redeveloped, the city should assess whether its housing stock continues to meet residents' needs. On top of that, the majority of employed city residents commute to work outside of the city. This, along with slowing job growth, suggests the city is becoming more of a bedroom community. Since the development pipeline includes more potential jobs than forecasted, some of the approved non-residential development could be converted to residential without affecting long-term economic growth. Additionally, a larger share of city residents speak limited English compared to the county, reflecting an increase in the city's foreign-born population. Combined with the city's growth in persons of color, this suggests that much of the city's recent population growth is driven by foreign immigration. income and housing cost burden disparities appear to be increasing as well. Census tracts with the highest incomes, located in the southwest corner of the city, have experienced increases in income and decreases in housing cost burden, while lower income areas on the east side of the city have faced decline in incomes and higher housing cost burden. Finally, the city's population is aging, with the 65-plus age group growing the most, while the 18 to 34 age group declines, suggesting that the increase in single-person households is mainly older retirees rather than young single working adults. So now these final slides will present the potential master plan implications that could arise from this 2025 update to the visioning data report. And staff is currently in the process of updating both the land use and transportation elements of the city's master plan through the Build Gaithersburg 2040 initiative. So it is important that both mayor and city council and planning commission carefully consider these following policy implications, as they may significantly influence future decisions. To begin, with average household sizes remaining stable, projected growth in multifamily units, and low vacancy rates in 2 and 3 bedroom units, the city should affirm its policy position to ensure that multifamily developments include an appropriate share of larger multi-bedroom projects to meet renters' needs, as supported by the city's adopted housing element. Moreover, new multifamily projects must provide 15% affordable units, but the city's incomes are lower than nearby areas. With older affordable market rate housing at risk from redevelopment and price pressures, land use recommendations should recognize preserving affordable units, also outlined in the housing element. And as both commercial and residential uses compete for the same space, the city is shifting toward a bedroom community, with 90% of residents commuting out of the city for work. The master plan will need to define whether to maintain or grow the city's local employment base by providing recommendations like a comprehensive rezoning to the MCD zone in order to guide this direction. Additionally, the COVID-19 pandemic has increased office vacancies in the city, which already has older office buildings and a decline in office space since 2016. These vacant, aging offices offer redevelopment opportunities, and the land use element should clarify whether to keep them as offices or allow other uses like manufacturing, residential, or mixed-use developments. And finally, the city's land use and transportation elements recommendations should work together to minimize the various east versus west of I-270 divides by planning for connectivity among residential areas, jobs, and amenities, balancing housing opportunities, both rental and ownership throughout the city, distributing employment nodes on both sides of I-270, and investing in the city's equity emphasis areas. So now that we have all of this data, how will it guide us in our next steps? It will play a big role in guiding the development master plan recommendations, supporting informed policymaking decisions, reviewing development plan applications, serving as a foundational baseline for future visioning data reports, and to keep the public informed and engaged throughout the planning process. And then just to note, there will also be an upcoming consultant report that will supplement this 2025 data visioning report. It will provide an analysis on the city's retail and multifamily markets, and will also help identify any future residential, rental, and commercial needs of the city. And these reports will be available early 2026. So thank you so much. That is the end of our presentation, and we are here for any questions.
All right. Thank you all for a great presentation and for clearly a ton of work in pulling all this together, but very important exercise. I want to open it up for questions. Who'd like to go first? John Bauer?
I guess I'll start. I'll break the ice anyway. All right. So just one quick question about correlation. In the data that explained where people are going when they commute to or from the city for work, is that cut up into ways to understand whether when you come, let me make sure the question comes out right. In the data that explains rent versus owned and to what extent they're cost burdened or not, is that correlated to who's traveling in and out of the city for work? So what I'm getting at is, let me see if I can do it in a more general sense. If we're moving towards a bedroom community, which frankly is kind of where things started out in suburban Maryland 40 years ago, right, or 50 years ago, but are we talking about a housing demand that's really for folks that aren't that are working somewhere else? Are we talking about a housing demand for people that are working in the city, or neither? And it's just sort of a way. I'm not trying to answer the question so much as the data would suggest that if you understand how much of the demand for housing is for people that are commuting outside the city, it would seem to me to inform a different decision than if it was for folks that are working within the city or developing opportunities for employment in the city. So I'm just looking for a way to maybe see that at some point. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so I mean, staff can look at the LEHD data to see what other information is available in there. There may be some information about income and things like that. Anecdotally, I think there's sort of this understanding that, the closer you get to DC, the higher they're paying the jobs, but also the more expensive it is to live. So typically
Yeah.
what happens is people who are working closer into the DC area will live a little bit farther out and then commute in towards DC. Right now, with the Gaithersburg analysis, obviously what we saw is most people who do commute into the city are commuting from District 9, which means they probably live, in Montgomery Village maybe, or maybe they even live south of the city. So we can certainly look at that as well to see if that anecdotal trend of, we expect people from Germantown and Clarksburg to commute to jobs in Gaithersburg, and then the people who live in Gaithersburg are probably paying a little more rent, or then commuting farther south where the jobs pay more. But we can certainly look into that.
Because I think ultimately, and this is the council's decision, but it seems like there's going to be a decision point on whether the policy and therefore the land use will simply absorb whatever the trend is or the tendencies are, or whatever you want to use for that term, or influence something else, influence, a move towards some other mix or some other pattern.
Right, and I think the other policy question is about,
Right, exactly. So
does Gaithersburg want to encourage more people to live and work within the city?
Whatever-
And how do you do that if,
Right, but whatever
if
that
there's
is-
realities of housing costs and
But whatever that
jobs?
decision is, it seems like we need to know what
So-
that pattern is now.
Okay.
Thank you.
Neil.
So the data on where people are working, whether it's in the city or outside the city, how do you address NIST not being in the city? Do we look at it as if it were in the city, or there's a lot of jobs there?
Right, so for the forecast, it's not included because it's not within the city limits. So for the COG forecast, it would be included in Montgomery County's jobs numbers, but not in the city of Gaithersburg's jobs numbers. For the LEHD, it's a similar thing where, remember we talked about District 9 being the main area that people are coming from or going to even to commute to a job. So obviously NIST is in District 9, it's just not in the city. So it could be that people live right across the street from NIST and are commuting there. But again, it looks like they don't live and work in the city because NIST is not in the city. So, and there's sort of those surrounding areas too, like the Life Sciences Center and other areas that a similar situation probably exists.
So in terms of the very high percentage of renters who are cost burdened or even severely cost burdened, the city's population is growing, number of housing units is growing. Why are people moving here if it's too expensive for them to rent here? Why do we think that is?
Well, we could go back to the one slide, I guess, of the rental costs. So I think the rental cost was showing that Gaithersburg was actually higher, is that correct, than the county?
We can go back to that slide. It's
Yeah.
lower than Rockville.
Yeah.
Is 30.
Again, Rockville's closer in, so we would expect the higher rents there. Let's see if we can figure out where that is. I know it's back in the housing. Back before all of this.
It just seems like people are making a choice to come live in places that are hard to afford.
Right. So for Gaithersburg, it does have a lower, even though it's a high rent, right? It is lower than Rockville, much lower than Rockville, as you can see on the slide here on the left. And it is actually lower than Montgomery County. So that could be one reason that people are moving here, because the rent is still lower.
So it's less severely unaffordable.
Correct.
But not by
Correct.
much. I mean, that gap is not really all that big.
No, especially with the county. But with Rockville, it's a pretty
Yeah.
big county. And of course, the county is large. So, you have Germantown, which one would expect to have lower rents. And you also have Bethesda and Friendship Heights, which one would expect would be higher rents, because again, closer into DC. So,
Based on the directionality and the cost, it feels like people are choosing to live in a place that's less expensive than where they work, and they're commuting from less expensive areas to more expensive areas.
That's probably correct. And again, anecdotally, we do know there are people who come all the way from Frederick or even Hagerstown, right, to work in Gaithersburg. So, or some people even live in West Virginia and take the train in. So there's certainly, and assumingly it's cheaper to live in those areas than Gaithersburg. So again, the people living in Gaithersburg may be choosing to live here because they do get a higher paying job farther south, but it could also be that their job is close by and again in District 9 and it's just outside the city, like across from Lake Forest Mall or something, and then they just, happen to live in the city instead of, in the county.
And one last question, when we're looking at rental units and the size of the units and things, are we only looking at multifamily rentals, or are we taking into account townhouses and single-family homes that are being rented?
So
Because those
that-
tend to be larger.
That data is from CoStar, and it's strictly multifamily rental units.
Right, but the data from the ACS that shows, tenure, which is, do you rent or do you own? That would include all the people who are renting townhouses or renting detached houses even, because that's just if you rent or own. And it's not, the CoStar data really is limited to the multifamily that is intended to be rented, right? But for the census, it's really just, do you rent or do you own? So you could live in a condominium, but you're renting it, but you don't own it. And that would still be multifamily. So what we've seen for the city is that when you look at the rental, the intended to be rented housing units, that is a lower percentage than the actual number of people who are renting, or the actual number of units that are being rented in the city. So I think it's around 40% or so of all the housing units are intended to be rental units, rental multifamily. But I think it's around 50% or 51% that people are actually renting in the city. So it is a higher percentage of renters. So we do know that some of the townhouses, 2/2s, condominiums are being rented out and are not owner occupied.
So do we think that's making up for what I want to say is, those tend to be larger.
Correct.
Larger number of bedrooms. So is that making up for the need for larger units? Is that where people who need 2 and 3 and 4 bedrooms are going instead of into multifamily?
It could be, certainly. We think right now that's it's not a insignificant percentage, but it's, overall, it's not a high percentage of the intended for sale units that are being rented out. However, if that were to change, then it might actually change some other things about Gaithersburg. If you had, imagine if half the units in Kentlands were rented out instead of people living there who owned it, right? Might have a different, people who rent may have a different idea about things than people who own. I don't know.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Rob.
Thanks, Mayor. Thank you for the presentation.
Rob, come a little closer to the mic. Thanks.
Is it possible to get more contextual data for the area that's around us? And so you do have Rockville there. That's great, because we always like to compare ourselves favorably to Rockville. But the county's a large place with a lot of different situations. And so, is there the ability to pull Germantown data, Montgomery Village data, Olney data?
Yes, actually, I'm going the wrong way on my, as I go through the slides here. When we get to the transportation piece, these districts that we talked about, so these are also known as county subdivisions in the census world. So there is information available at that level, so we could actually look at that level. In addition, there are these things called census designated places. So like Germantown is one of those census designated places because it's not incorporated. So if the council did want more information about certain areas of the county, staff could certainly look into that and add that or present that to you in some other form.
Okay. Yeah, I'd be interested particularly in the near-in areas, because we're ultimately tying in our plan to the Montgomery Village sector plan, and we tie in up to Germantown, and so that would be helpful to me.
Right, and so you're looking for similar like demographics and economic kind of information about, say,
Housing
Montgomery
mixes,
Village,
yeah,
Germantown, City of Rockville. We could do certainly, and we could look to see what other areas are next to. I know Washington Grove is another incorporated place, so we could look to see what other areas.
Okay.
Would be
Yeah,
available.
particularly Montgomery Village, they recognize single-family housing was not necessarily the best way to go, and so they've been pretty prolific in their future housing stock. So it'd be interesting to figure out how that ties in, both in comparative, but also in transportation, for example. We hear a lot about folks not loaning a lot of cars on Montgomery Village Avenue, but and they complain about Gaithersburg, but when you build more
Right.
houses on Montgomery Village, there's going to be more cars on Montgomery Village Avenue. So that kind of stuff would be interesting.
All right, we're going to go to Lisa. And then I see a whole bunch of eager beavers over here and over there. So we'll start with Lisa. We're just going to go down the road.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for the presentation. I have a question. Something I saw interesting it's on packet page 22, figure 1.1.5. I'm not sure if that relates to your presentation.
So we can try to bring that up. I'll bring it. Which packet page was it again? I'm sorry.
22.
22. Well, let's see if we can just type in 22 and get there. Okay. And then I'll see if I can make this bigger. Oh no. Which one?
Do you trying to make it bigger?
Yeah. Oh yeah, that's true. Since it's a web browser. So is it this one? The
not
population change, or is it the next one?
Yeah, first one, right there. You got
This
it.
first one?
Yes.
Okay.
So here where it talks about the population change, unlike the county or the metro area where Black and African American, non-Hispanic, there's a significant decline that we don't see in the other areas for that specific demographic. And you may not have the answer now, and I understand if you don't. But I'm interested in the cause of that and why it looks different from the county or the metro area.
Yeah, I don't have an answer for that right now. It's possible that some of that is what we did see in the 2020 census and the ACS has passed, since then, is that a lot more people are picking multiple races. So it's possible that some of that decline is due to people picking multiple races, or deciding to choose a other race or something to that effect. It could just be actual, decline as well. So it's something we'd have to look into further to see how much of that is actual decline, which is what we, with the white non-Hispanic population, I think there's no question that it's probably decline and not they're just picking multiple races. Although some of it may be that as well if they decided to do that.
And then another interesting thing is in the previous report, the Black non-Hispanic population actually experienced the greatest growth of all of the population groups. So that's another contrast. Again, we don't have a specific answer for that, but just another interesting trend
Okay.
to note.
All right, I'd be interested for you to dig deeper and figure
Yeah,
out what's going on.
and this may tie in with Councilmember Wu's request too. If we were to show like what's happening around in the areas around the city, maybe some of those are gaining in certain areas, and so it could be that people are moving from Gaithersburg to another place for whatever reason. That's another question. Is it less expensive? Is it that there's housing there that Gaithersburg doesn't have, or is it just they like to live in a different area? It's hard to say.
So if I could jump in real quick, the purpose of this study was really to, again, look back at the 2019 report to this report and just kind of compare and contrast what happened between that and the pandemic. The previous report did not study these census tracts outside of the city, similar to what you're requesting the staff to pull together. So I think the amount of work, that it would be a lot of work on staff to kind of really pull that together, because it was, and again, the compare and contrast would not necessarily be there.
In terms of not the census tracts, but just in terms of the race.
Well, I'm talking about the census tracts. Again, comparing and contrasting, again, all of a sudden Germantown to Gaithersburg. That was not studied originally under the 2019 report.
Okay, I like what Kirk said. I'm not sure in terms of how laborious this would be to determine if people in 16 were picking African American as their race. Did we see a jump in other or multiple races? That would be of interest to me too, and I'm not sure what kind of workload we're talking about there.
I would defer to the team on that one, but again, I heard that we were looking to comparisons between the city and, let's say, again, Germantown.
No, I didn't ask that.
Okay.
No. That was that other
that was
council
my
member.
foolish suggestion. That was right.
One down there.
Yeah, I mean, we could, I don't think it would be, it would be some work, but I don't think it would be too much work if you were just interested in 2022 to see, oh, well, how many of the people who picked multiple races also picked Black African American as one of those races? That information is available from the
Okay.
census. So we could look into that to see, out of all of the ones that are there, like, what percentage picked that
Okay.
as well. And, it would be more work if we were to look back to see, say, in 2016, but it could be done as well for 2016
Okay. Yeah,
to see
I'd
if
be
that
interested.
increased significantly. Because again, the other multiple race categories, particularly multiple race, that increased significantly since 2020. I guess more people decided to choose that.
Okay.
Tanisha?
I was just going to add that I think Greg's response was more to Rob Wu's question and trying to get that narrowed a bit, because as it was described, what I heard was essentially duplicating the study for those nearby census tract or census designated areas, which would be a lot of work, right? That it was 8-ish months to pull this together. It would be very similar to be able to do that comparison. So we can work on maybe narrowing what information you're looking for. That was the workload response that Greg was
I mean,
providing.
even if you want to take a backup napkin, I'm not looking for a laborious effort, but context for the city, I think, would be helpful.
Okay, well,
Take that for what
we will talk more offline.
something more than zero.
Yeah, we'll talk more offline. Make sure that we deliver something that's useful, that does not require a duplication of the study.
Lisa, did you have any more questions?
Nope. That's it.
Okay, we'll go to Jim.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for all of the work that went into this. Lots of great data. Couple eye-opening things as well, and also some confirmation of things that I think we've already known. But I think I have some questions and some comments. Number one, piggybacking on the conversation around the commuting patterns, what jumped out to me was it kind of shines a light on the lack of public transportation to the city from down county, as well as cross county. We still have not gotten, our two-way mark that we were hoping to start developing with, because of, cuts at the state level. We still don't have the BRT. The CCT was shelved, et cetera. So it definitely, it's not surprising that people that are upstream, if you will, are primarily the ones that are coming to Gaithersburg for the jobs. From a policy standpoint, I'm not ready to give up the hill on making sure that we have adequate jobs here in the city and attract business to the city. There's some great opportunities with Lake Forest coming, and we built employment into the master plan for that. So I certainly think that there's a great opportunity to create jobs here and have people want to commute to us from elsewhere, and hopefully we can make it easier to do that. I did notice in our rental, in our existing development pipeline, I think it was on packet page 51, where we were focused, we show that it's like 68 to 70% of the approved units in our pipeline are multifamily rentals. And it got me thinking that, should we spend more time as a body in future development looking at smaller ownership opportunities? A lot of times when I'm working with, people who are looking to rent, we also explore, well, does it make sense for you to buy? Because it gives you, at a similar price point where we're looking at monthly payments, there are opportunities for folks to buy their first home. So, with our first-time home buyer assistance program, things like that, maybe because so many of our folks are rent burden in the rental, or cost burden in the rental space, if we can maybe start focusing on some of these, condos and things that might be more attainable for some of these first-time buyers, then they're able to lock in a cost and then that protects them from future rent increases. So just as a policy standpoint, as we go forward, maybe we look at a better balance of that. Because, obviously the fact that so many folks are cost burdened, we want to provide more housing. We do have opportunities for these infill. We've had conversations, some of us on the council, about, looking at our borders and seeing if there's opportunities for annexing and redevelopment opportunities there. So I think, this data is kind of eye-opening, and it should cause us to think about, we've done a good job of balancing our development going forward, being 50-50 between renting and buying. But if we're seeing that it's becoming more and more expensive to rent, then maybe we should be trying to shift that model more towards home ownership and then creating opportunities for those folks to be able to afford those places. That's my thought. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks, Jim. We'll go to Jamil.
All right, good evening, everybody. Let me go back to the presentation, because I wrote it slide numbers as you went through it to make it easier. Slide 33.
Which slide, I'm sorry?
33.
33, okay. Much quicker.
On the 73% of owner-occupied that are not cost burden, on the owner-occupied, do you have like an aging of it? And not aging in terms of age, but how long they've owned that property? So somebody who's owned it for 5 years or 10 years, right? I would imagine somebody owned it for 20 years, they're going to be less cost burden potentially than somebody who bought it 5 years.
Yeah, we'd have to look at the data, the census data, to see if that was an available thing. What I can say off the top of my head that's available is they do split it into owner occupied with a mortgage and owner occupied without a mortgage.
Yeah.
So one would assume the one without a mortgage is probably not going to be cost burdened, although there are a few of them, believe it or not, because they don't have the mortgage to pay, right? They only have the taxes and things. But there are a few of those that still end up being cost burdened, but most of the ones that are cost burden do have a mortgage. So
Okay.
that is one thing we could look into.
Appreciate that. And then on slide 37, and then maybe, piggyback on what Councilmember Wu said, without reinventing the wheel, like Rockville's a great comparator. Is Frederick a great comparator here as well in terms of being able to pull?
I mean, I can say that, in the population report, I do include Frederick City in there. They tend to have a much lower median income even than Gaithersburg, and that's probably because they're farther away. So yeah, again, without creating more work for all of us and everything, I think if the council had some certain areas that they were interested in, staff could look at that. So like if it was Germantown, Montgomery Village, even Bethesda, if you wanted to see where Bethesda stands, I would expect Bethesda would be higher than the county, but you never know, right, until you look at the data. So that's certainly something that staff could probably pull when wouldn't be a huge, labor-intensive thing.
And then when you're looking at the number, I don't have a slide number, the rest are just comments and questions. On the number of rental units, you say you rely on CoStar to get some of that information. How do you take advantage of like our rental licensing data? So I think we have a list of all the rental units, whether they're townhouses, condos, single-family rentals, multifamily rentals. How's that incorporated in these reports?
So this report does not include rental licensing data from the city. It's strictly using CoStar data, and we did that in order to compare to the previous report. That's what they did in the previous report as well. I know we have the capability to run reports on licenses, so it's potentially something we could look at. I'm not sure how much data is available there. I'd have to look into that and then get back to you.
Okay. And just generally on data, when you have, you guys are longer, folks are longer, like planners, longitudinal data, try to smooth out things like the pandemic, recessions, things that occur. Is the potential kind of federal policy changes that might start in earnest in October cause you any methodological changes in terms of your recommendations and your analysis? If, for example, some estimates, I think the county put some estimates last week of 20, 30, 40,000, sort of job changes, which may lead to outward migration, which may lead to other pieces. And as you're looking to make a set of recommendations to report in January, that might be like right in the middle of like all that chaos. How do you plan for those kind of seismic shifts that are occurring in the middle of your planning process?
So I don't think you can really plan for it. I think what you do is you just observe as much as you can, look at data that's available, and try to make sense of it. But the problem is a lot of the effects of that won't really be known right away. Like it's going to take several years. So for example, the loss of jobs, right? A lot of those jobs that are being scaled back are in the District of Columbia. So the question is, certainly some are in Montgomery County too. And also there are other things happening in the District of Columbia that might mean that some people are going to move out of the District of Columbia for various reasons. And so the question is, are they going to move out of the region, or are they going to just move to the surrounding areas? So it's a difficult dynamic to know without actually having long enough time to look back and see what's happening. So I think a lot of it is kind of going to be a sort of wait and see, and it's almost like you have to sort of move forward with your plans, maybe keep that in mind, but also you have to say, well, the other longer term question is this the world now is reset, like what happened with COVID, and now this is the new reality for the next 50 years, or is this a shorter term thing that in 4 years things will change, or in 5 years or 6 years or 8 years or whatever, things might change and look different. And so that's where I think it gets a lot trickier, right? And now Rob's going to come up and correct everything I said.
What is it? The only constant
So
is
we
change.
experienced this back in 2009. The Great Recession hit mid-master plan. So what did we do? I think what everybody has to consider is this is where the public engagement, this is where the focus groups come in. We want to talk to professionals, look at stuff that's going on, and their analysis of the now and the near term with markets. This is a great study. This sets, again, the longer term vision, helps identify those trends, see stuff that's gone through stuff. But to your point, we still have to acknowledge what's currently going on. One of the things Greg and I have discussed is it makes sense, in 6 years to redo this comprehensive study. It'll take us to 2028 data year, because data is always 3 years behind our year. So we'll be through this. Again, while we can be sort of sketchy about what's going on right now, the midterms are coming up. Who knows what could happen? Everything could go out the window. So we don't want to be overly reactionary in writing a master plan based upon what's on the nightly news that week. So it's going to be the balance. It's looking at longer term trends, nearer term trends, focus groups, engagement, and that way. So I think then we can get a better balanced plan.
Thank you. Just two quick more comments on Lisa's slide in terms of the population demographical change. It's always helpful when you see percentage changes to contextualize that with the total number. So if there's a 10% change, is that 10% on 30,000 or 500 people? Because they're different kind of quantum of piece.
Right, and I just
the other one, in terms of the ethnicity thing.
Okay, yeah. Well, for this
Yeah.
slide, I just wanted to point out
Sure.
that the percentage that's shown here is the percent of Gaiser's population as a percent of the county. So it's not that incremental change as you were alluding to. This is just showing the numbers. I believe in the population report that we published, it does have the percent change in there as well. If you wanted to look at that, we didn't include that in here. But this slide does show that, the population increased 4.4% between 2016 and 2022. And was there another slide that you were also mentioning?
The one in terms of like African American.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
That one. The slide that shows the demographics.
It's not on your presentation
Oh, it's only in the
packet.
But I know in some instances in the full report where it looked like there was a large change, but we noted that really it might be just a function of the small population size
Correct.
to begin with. We did try to point that out.
That's the point I was trying to make. Yeah.
yes.
And then in terms of, so you got CoStar data, census data, our own internal kind of data. How do you think about, or how do you use, for population or movement? And there's some like cell phone data you can acquire in terms of a placer and all that stuff to be able to contextualize some of this data and sort of, back into it or support it when there's discrepancies between different data sources.
I think those data sources would require a subscription of sort. So I think this is what we have access to currently. This is publicly available data. So that's what we use for this report. I'm not sure if there are specific sources you would want us to look into, but for consistency purposes, we really wanted to use the same sources that were available for the previous report.
Okay. Thank you. Sure.
All right, Lloyd.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. as a member of the increasing 65 and over crowd, I have a question about why the 22 to 34-year-olds are not moving in here, or that the population is decreasing when we've got many more new apartments coming online that are single, one-bedroom, or efficiencies. Is there a correlation there between the fact that we're not gaining the 22 to 34-year-olds? Or is it just there's nothing here for them?
That's a very good question. That's something we'd have to look into. I mean, some of it could be that the prices, again, are not, especially if you're on the 22 side of that age group, it could be the prices are still less if you go north to Germantown or Clarksburg or whatever. So that could be part of it. It could be that you have other people that are renting those places, and so there's just not a lot of vacancy, which is also true of Gaithersburg. There's not a lot of vacancy for the
Is it
apartments.
also employment opportunities or lack thereof?
It's hard to say. I mean, I would think there probably are employment opportunities for that age group in Gaithersburg. Quite a few, employment opportunities. It's just, again, what we've seen just on the macro level is again, only around, was it 8% of people live and work in Gaithersburg? Is that right?
Around
Yeah.
7.
7% work and live in Gaithersburg. So most of the people who live in Gaithersburg but have a job are going somewhere else for that job. And most of the people who are working in Gaithersburg are coming from somewhere else to work in Gaithersburg. So it's just, and we haven't looked at the other areas, but I wouldn't be surprised if Rockville, Germantown, Montgomery Village all looked the same. And then when you get to Frederick, maybe it looks different, because maybe in Frederick,
Less different, right?
it's there's more people that live and work in Frederick, but then a lot of them still commute out, I would imagine, too.
Okay, right.
So.
And just a comment, we've got new technology that's overwhelming us. It's AI. And that is going to have some impact, if not a major impact, on professionals and all the other, that sector that you called the most mobile, the most financially stable part of the population. In your study later on, I mean, this ended at 2022. We're now in 2025. Things have really changed dramatically. This was technology that we didn't even consider back in 2022. And the way it's moving as quickly as it is, I think that needs to be dealt with in the next step in the larger studies.
Agreed.
Just a comment.
Yeah.
All right, we're going to go to Phil.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Kirk, one question I had related to the chart that tracked Gaithersburg home values over time. Can you confirm, was that median home value, or?
Yes, it's median.
It's median?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
How does that take into account the change and is that only for purchase housing stock? I'm assuming, if it's talking market value, or are you looking at market value of, what a multifamily unit is worth?
Right. So it's not exactly market value. It's self-reported in the census, right? So it's what people think their house is worth based on whatever information they have to know how much it's worth. We did, adjust it for the inflation to sort of show, again, and you can see from 2010 to 2016, it actually declined. Then it recovered to some degree between 2016 and 22, but not back to where it was in 2010.
I guess my underlying question is, if you plotted this over top of the change in the makeup of the for sale or owner-occupied housing stock in that same time period, could this or is this value change related to, for instance, a higher percentage of townhomes or condos now than that, in theory, would result in a lower median value than a higher percentage of the housing stock being single-family homes?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's an interesting hypothesis. And if Gaithersburg showed that trend and the other areas did not, I think that would be a pretty interesting hypothesis that probably should be explored. I mean, we can still explore it, obviously, but since all of them sort of look similar, I think it's probably really more about economics and not about that, although some of it may be related to the type of housing that's for sale. Certainly, if all of a sudden you're building a lot of 2/2 condos, as you pointed out, or just regular garden condos and townhouses that sell for less than the detached houses, for example. That could, drive the price
I mean,
down.
it only came to mind because of the earlier slides talking about the change in development pipeline and what was, the types of housing products that we are building over the same time period.
Correct. And in one of the appendices, staff did look at the city data to see, because, we looked at the census data and it was saying, oh, the townhouses changed by this amount, and staff was a little skeptical of the census data. Again, it's self-reported, and also they do some other magic in there on their end. So we did look at city data, and so in the appendix, there is some information about how much it actually changed between 2016 and 2022 based on the city's records. So how many townhouses were actually constructed, how many detached houses were constructed, how many 2/2s, all that stuff's in there. So you can certainly look at that part of the report, or I could bring it up if you really wanted to look at it. But it is in there, so that would probably answer your question about whether it was, whether there was a lot more of, which I think there were more of the townhouses than the detached. But these days, townhouses are almost as expensive as the detached houses in Gaithersburg and Montgomery County. So it'd be more the 2/2s and the condos, I think, that would drive that.
That's it.
All right, Carol.
Oh, thank you, Judd. Mr. Mayor, could you bring up slide with the ones that you showed? It's number 24.
Too far.
Okay, and so it's kind of echoing some of the other comments, but I was looking at this and I was wondering if the aging population, back to the 65 and over, is that tied back to the household income as well, which was number 37, and then the population living alone? In other words, we have an aging population that's not moving out of the houses that they bought 40 years ago.
That is very likely part
Okay.
of why the single household or living alone population increased. It probably has to do with, empty nesters and whatnot. It could also be, there could be some income related things there too, since people who retire tend to have lower income than people who are actively working. Although people do tend to work longer now, so instead of 65 and over, maybe it needs to be 75 and over. But that is actually in the census data in terms of income by age.
Okay.
And I know when staff looked at that before, we did note that income for, I can't remember the age groups exactly, but the youngest age group had the lowest income. Then the second lowest income, if I recall correctly, was the 65 and over, and then the next one was the 34 to 55 or whatever. That was the highest one, obviously, the one in the middle.
Yeah, because I was wondering how that might even tie back to the rental burden, because there's not enough of the single-family housing stock really available, because you have the older generation, of which I'm part of, that can say, hey, it's cheaper for me to stay in this house that I bought
Right.
rather than downsize and go somewhere. Although we're pretty well downsized when we bought.
Right. Yeah, and that also is tied into other, obviously economic issues like interest rates and things like that, about that
Sure.
sort of,
Good
there's
point.
been I've read some articles about that too, that there's this sort of, some of the, what's perceived as a housing shortage for sale housing has to do with, people not wanting to sell their house because
Yeah.
either they don't have a mortgage or they have such a low interest rate that it doesn't make economic sense to sell it because they'll actually be paying more, and so they don't want to do that, whether they're working or retired. So
Yeah,
I could
yeah.
definitely think that would be a valid point. Something we could look into further if that was something of interest.
Excellent report. Thank you.
Anything else from anybody else before we go to the public? Okay. Is there anybody in the public who'd like to testify, ask question tonight? Please come on up, Jeanette. You know the rules. State your name.
Yeah, I can answer a question maybe.
Well, yeah, you know the rules though. State your name and address or neighborhood.
Yeah. Okay, I'm Jeanette Rosenbaum. In this data, I'm going to be in Montgomery County because I live in the Lake Forest neighborhood just outside city limits. We just saw a lot of data and statistics. Here's an anecdote. Councilmember Harris's question about why are people moving here when it's so expensive. Here's one story about why. In 2019, I was living in my parents' house. Then I was offered a job in Gaithersburg. The amount of money they offered me for that job was not enough to afford to live here. But the alternative was living in my parents' house. So I took the job, I took the cheapest housing I could find in the area, and I was cost burdened, but I made it work. The general story there, wages are stagnating, cost of housing is skyrocketing. That's happening everywhere. I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of people have this story. I think that's all I had to say about that.
Thank you. Do we have anyone else here who wants to say anything? Okay, let me just check on Teams. If anybody on Teams would like to make a statement, ask a question, just use the raise hand function and I'll call on you. I see one hand up. I saw one hand up, but it's gone down. Okay, it's up. David Mullins, tech team, if you could bring up David Mullins, that would be great. And David, you know the rules. Go right ahead. You're
All right, so the teams here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. David Mullins, live at the Gateway Apartments. I'll just start by tacking on to Ms. Rosenbaum's statements there. Because, yeah, I mean, how could, I don't know if you're asking how people move here and can't afford it or whatever. I don't know. What kind of diversity do you want? I mean, it's not, there's all kinds of diversity. If you're going to have socioeconomic diversity, poor people are going to have to live here. But more specifically, I mean, if someone's working in support of folks at the Asbury Methodist Village, for instance, and that person can't afford a car, I don't know what you expect. Like, those people need service. Maybe you don't care if that person rides the bus for 2 hours. I do. And so, like, those are the scenarios. So that's the answer, there. But really what I was going to say is just to Jim, the comments felt a little out of touch earlier. Well, let me collect my thoughts for a minute here. I know I'm only on a time limit, but I'm sorry. Just as someone who's desperately trying to buy a home, the idea that buying a home is a way to protect yourself from rent increases. I'm sorry, man. You're on the dais. Y'all are the way. Put the guardrails in. The way to protect us from rent increases is just to stop gouging. You can do it. You have the power. And that's just out of touch. I'm sorry it's not just me. I know too many people who are never going to buy here, but this is our home. And so that's just not how to do that. But interesting stuff tonight. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you. Do we have anybody else who'd like to make a statement or ask a question? Not seeing any. Okay. Well, thank you for the testimonies. Is there any further? Jim, go right ahead.
I'd just like to respond to that. And I appreciate Mr. Mullins' opinion on this, but I do take exception to being out of touch. As a realtor, I am working every day with people who are trying to find a home that they can afford, whether it's rental or purchase. So that's number one. Number two, I understand the challenges out there, right? And I appreciate that. It's a little off topic, but rent control will not reduce the cost of rent. Increasing the amount of stock is what allows rents to go down, and all you have to do is look at the city of Austin. The reason I brought up the potential of increasing condos and things like that, because we are looking at the percentage of people who were cost burdened. And we know with rents that they continue to go up. Whether it's 2%, 5%, whatever, they continue to go up with the market. When you lock in a 30-year fixed loan, your payment stays put for 30 years. That was the point I was making. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
All right, thank you.
I will add a footnote.
John?
I think so I'm going to be careful because as the planning commission, we want to focus on land use and somehow this begins to take a physical form. But there is a thread here that's popped up at our planning conferences, at some other kind of adjacent discussions. And it is the fundamental conflict between sustaining affordable housing and offering opportunities for wealth. And they're in conflict because real estate is the way to both of those and is the answer to both of those. And it's talked about a lot in the world of urban planning and some of the things that are adjacent to what we're talking about tonight. It's going to be impossible to stay away from that as we get deeper into this master plan because it will be part of that underlying notion of whether or not you're building for a population that wants to start here and build wealth through the course of ownership. And that's how a lot of folks, only way that folks can do that, or create a housing stock that then is protected from or is shielded from exorbitant rent increases over short periods of time. And it's there's no particular answer I want to offer right now, but I think we do have to keep that discussion on the table and how it ultimately will affect decisions about zoning and the objectives of the built environment that are going to support one or the other or both, and how we can kind of say it up front now honestly and take it head on, because it's going to be the conflict in some of these discussions about housing.
Thank you, John. Matt, it kind of looked like you were having some feelings there. Did you want to add anything here?
Emotional guy. No, I think, I see maybe more than most folks these reports on a daily basis from all over the country. And while I really appreciate the sort of year over year, year over 3 year, year over 5 year sort of trends that we look at, it really is a thin foundation. We need a lot more talk and understanding as to what John's sort of maybe leading to, maybe Jim, you're leading to it too, is a sort of focus on gap housing and some other forms of housing that we can begin to, encourage in order to solve some of these problems. But to John's point, we've talked about nothing else for 10 years now, and we don't have solutions yet. And it is, every week the same conversation, and we're still trying. So this is really, really hard and critical. There's nothing else that's more
No doubt about it.
No
doubt about it. Anything from anyone else before we get ready to adjourn? Go ahead, Lisa.
One other point, just that jobs play a part here as well, not just housing. We see the cost burden numbers, they're very high, but where are the skill sets? How do we increase skill sets, increase opportunity for higher paying jobs? We can't ignore that fact that it also plays a role in here as well. This isn't easy. It's a complicated mix.
Yep.
For sure. All right. Well, thank you all once again for a terrific presentation. All the work that you've put together, really appreciate it. And looking forward to seeing how it dovetails into our master planning process. So I will note that we have the next regular meeting of the Mayor Council will be next Monday, which is September 15th, 7:30 p.m. You can participate in person or over Teams. I was going to say Zoom, but Teams. So until next time, let's do great things, Gaithersburg. We are adjourned.